game 4 here. A Caro-Kann with not the most standard move order. We get kind of a King's Indian attack development for white on the king side, but black is also very comfortable. So an interesting switch here by Magnus to play the Caro-Kann rather than the Roy Lopez, which is what we saw in game 2.
And well, now your quote, all pawns, no hope, comes to mind. And there are a lot of pawns for black over there on the king side because you have a 4-on-3 advantage, but it's in some ways a disadvantage because those pawns are doubled. So black's king will certainly be safe here, but the long-term potential is in white's favor because white's 4-on-3 can create a pass pawn, whereas black's 4-on-3 is not so strong.
All pawns, no hope. Benny Watts. You know that Benny Watts was based on me. You remember when I was a kid and I was wearing that hat, carrying a knife around chess tournaments? That was normal, right? Anyway, we won't get into that.
Yeah, I hope no law enforcement officers are listening to you and carrying around.
Shout out to the username Gotham Checkers hanging out. Will someone get that guy a diamond membership? Love that. Gotham Checkers. Anyway, hanging out over there on Chess TV. Welcome everybody. If you're just tuning in, obviously you see the score. We got 18,000 of you on Twitch. And, 15,000 of you on YouTube. The day has just begun. It's 2-1. The world champion leads. In surprising fashion, MVL got his first dub with by Magnus flagging in the last game. All right.
And, well, Danny, new game, new time on the clock. Magnus doing okay. Maxime a little bit ahead on time. What do you think about this position? Because it seems very solid for black, but as I already hinted at, the long-term potential should be nice for white with the superior pawn structure.
Yeah, it's almost like a Berlin structure flip because black often has the doubled C pawns in a Berlin, which is actually better for black in terms of defending against the long-term 4-on-3 everybody, because in that case, it's not actually a 4-on-3, it's a 4-on-4, despite them being doubled. So this is a very just like kind of straightforward idea for white. If you can simplify and get to a position, this is what we say often in chess, is that white is kind of up a pawn, right? Because these doubled F pawns are not ideal and really give black no advantage on this side of the board. So I like MVL. I know the computer says close to level, but if we're looking for a second game to build on what just happened there, I think this is an okay start for white.
I'm with you. And I think that right now, Maxime just needs to come up with a plan because the position looks good, but where are you going from here? And B3 was played. I like that. You're going to play D4 next and not drop the pawn on C4. So then you can expand and even consider pushing the pawn to D5 and creating tactical problems instead of just positional ones.
A3 played, which is kind of trying to meet A4 with B4. This is sort of a common make a little pawn shuffle idea when someone is bringing a storm. You can react with support. The risk is, of course, now you've also undermined your own pawn chain, and you kind of give a dark square target. So, interesting response, A3. I was all in on your more direct D4, but we'll see how. And now Magnus switches to the center.
Yeah, and I guess A3 was taking away the B4 square from black's bishop on F8. I forgot about that bishop there. It's sitting and doing practically nothing. But watch out for that piece because it's still putting pressure on the A3 pawn, keeping the rook on A1 tied down for now. And if black is able to play F5 and G6, maybe that bishop can change diagonals to G7 at some point as well. So I do think there's some potential in that piece that could be underestimated.
Okay. Well, Magnus is down a minute on the clock here. And he did lose on time in game 3 if you've just tuned in the last minute or two. H6 played. I think he likes your F5 idea, Robert, because that move suggests he's trying to guard the G5 square so that F5 is not met by knight G5. But here comes MVL. Big center, and he's going to use it.
Play G5. I really think that, it looks risky, but G5 threatens F4, and they put a bishop on G7. I mean, it's not my game, so I'm making really risky, probably bad ideas.
Right.
But there was actually a point behind it, not just, hey, let's throw pawns forward.
Good news is you will have a game that is yours later on today versus Alex Lenderman. After this show, everyone stick around for the U.S. Championship qualifier where Robert Hess throws his hat in the ring as a player. I'll be there as a fan. And Yeah, in that case, Robert, you get to carelessly push pawns in front of your king side with no real thought of consequence. You get to do that later on today, so good luck.
Thanks. I appreciate the vote of confidence there. It's going to be a long day for me. And well, speaking of long days, this position, honestly, it feels like it's just this struggle for a real plan, a legitimate plan, not just
Yeah.
moving our pieces back and forth. And I think the problem for both players is you don't want to commit to a certain pawn push, for example, and have that backfire. I was speaking of g5 for black. That was too much. But even for white here, if you push a pawn to c5, you give up the d5 square permanently.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why both players are refraining from doing something that you can't take back.
I like the move knight e5. We'll quickly show tactics. If queen e5, there's bishop to b6, which hits the queen with a discovered threat, and the rook. Assuming there may be nothing better. I mean, you could even take h6 if you don't want the exchange, and that might get weird, but I think bishop b6 is the idea. Black will move this knight instead of taking, as we see. And now how does MVL defend the pawn once the tactics are over? Interesting. Queen c3.
I guess these the bishop b6 ideas were still a possibility, and that's why Max didn't even think about it. He just took on e3, didn't care about the e5 pawn. And look at this structure. So earlier we talked about how black's pawn structure was bad, but this pawn on e5 has gone a bit too far. Black can double on the d file and use those rooks to his advantage, and the e5 pawn always just needs to have an eye kept on it by one of white's pieces.
Yeah, and if white ever tries to reinforce with f4, everyone, then you got to watch out for diagonal problems as well as second rank problems. So I'm with you. It feels like white has pushed a little too far, which is why the computers even give black probably a slight mathematical edge here. Rook d7 has got MVL thinking, and note that the Frenchman's time advantage has disappeared. We are completely level on the clock, and it's going to come down to a time scramble. Get your scramby eggs out.
I was hoping that you would cook breakfast for me, but I woke up and you weren't here. So
next time you visit, you know that yogurt parfait every morning, buddy.
I can't wait. And Danny, a rook trade offered on the d file, which means that black has a little bit less firepower down the line. But still, you are the one, if you're Magnus Carlsen, in control of the board's only open file. So that should be to your advantage. But we've talked about the pawn structure, and for many turns now, the a5 pawn for black needs to have an eye kept on it as well. So if there are some trades on d7, the queen gets distracted, a5 could fall. So just you want to keep an eye on that.
Yeah, good point. And now if you give white a move or two, the bishop might sit on c2, the rook might come over to e1 or d1. So MVL also coordinating. It's kind of now or never for Carlsen to challenge the d file. You could play queen d7 with tempo, and if the bishop moves, maybe a move like queen d2, which defends a5 via x-ray and grabs the open file. I'd be looking for some way if I'm Carlsen to, in fact, he goes for this idea. But look at MVL, he's right back and ready.
And a4 played, but white doesn't have to capture that. I think capturing it would be an incorrect choice. And he plays bishop c2. He's going to...
Oh, that's the second queen sack of today. If you just got here, where have you been? Magnus is... I'm going to have to get my Magnus fathead out. He is a happy camper when it comes to queen sacks. We're going to keep this guy with me. Every time he sacks a queen, the world smiles. Did you know that? Every time Magnus Carlsen sacks a queen, an angel gets its wings.
I'm learning it for the first time, but thank you for being the one letting me know.
Rook d7. Now he plays a4. I was going to say maybe queen c3 to get off the pin because of b5, but a4 also does the trick.
Hey, for somebody who allegedly doesn't believe in fortresses, he said that himself. It looks like he's relying on a fortress here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because that quote has been used so much ever since he said that, and in basically in jest. Yeah, I think he knows that this fortress will be hard to break, but it should be possible for MVL. A5, as much as I applauded the queen sack, the more we look at it, this is exactly the kind of position the queen can flex on a rook and bishop. This queen's going to be able to take advantage of things here, maybe keep an eye over things here. Look at that move, threatens queen f8.
Right, and so as long as black keeps the squares covered, I'm not quite sure how white intends to make progress, because what black ideally wants is to trade off the queenside pawns. If those pawns come off the board, it will be nearly impossible for white to win. And so that's why Magnus is moving back and forth, saying you can't move your queen without dropping c4. And If you move the c4 pawn, then I get all the light squares.
Yeah, I was thinking the only way to do it is to punch a6 at some point. You punch a6, you make the trade, and you try to undermine the c6 pawn. If you can trade a for b here, everyone, then this c pawn becomes a passer. So look for queen b6, but then bishop c4, right? So here,
Exactly.
okay, there you go. He's threatening a6, and this prevents bishop c4. Here we go. This is how you break through, and MVL, I think, has found a way to do it.
But after queen takes c6, pawn a5, black will just try to rush that a pawn down the board to give that one up for white c pawn. So I feel like he's able to make this trade. It didn't seem like a trade, but how is white going to stop the a pawn if not capturing it?
Good point. Good question. Maybe queen b4 or queen a5 was on the agenda there. Ooh, e6.
Oh,
What's the idea?
nice.
If pawn
was
takes, there was
c6.
c6 and queen c3 check, everyone winning the bishop. That was the idea.
That was really nice. And I still don't see a totally easy win here because the
Right.
bishop and the rook will team up on the c8 square, and
Yep.
all of black's pawns are defended. But there must be some way to get that king in through the dark. So it's king d4, king e5. Not right now because you lose your queen, but in the future, king d4, king e5, king f6, and go for a checkmate.
Look at that idea. Here he goes. And I think that check, you can even meet it with king d6 and king e7 on rook d5 check. And the point, everybody, is if you take d8, white gets a new baby girl. MVL's
Queen
going to
f8,
check and
and
play
then
king
king
f6,
f6
and
and
it's
queen
all
d7.
over. And we have a tied match in the 5-1 portion, everybody.